I'm Anne-Marie Mediwake, and I'm here with Kelsey McEwen. Lindsey is away today. Welcome to CTV Your Morning, the podcast. This week, we are chatting with the stars of Outer Banks about season 4 of the hit show. My daughters and I love this. Plus, don't get bamboozled. We're going to look at how to spot and avoid scams when you're using platforms like Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji.
But we'd like to start things off with a front seat to history. Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington, D.C., it's been a landmark on U Street since 1958. But it's more than just a place for chili half smoke. It's where communities have come together, where generations meet, and where history, it's etched in on every single wall. It has seen the birth of countless political movements, and on her recent trip to D.C. to cover the U.S. presidential election, Anne-Marie, you had a chance to sit down with the owner and co-founder, Virginia Ali.
She was incredible, Kels. She's 90 years young, and what this woman has seen and experienced, the people she's talked to. So, she sat with Martin Luther King, Dr. King at the table, at a booth in Ben's Chili Bowl with John Lewis, and they would plan the March on Washington. And then when the riots broke out after the death of Dr. King, she talks about people coming in crying when that happened. And then the riots broke out, and Ben's Chili Bowl stayed open, and about the planning that happened for the peace movement afterwards. I mean, we fast forward to today. We were talking history with her on a historic night, Election Day 2024 in the U.S. Capitol. It was a real privilege to get her perspective on then and now.
Well, it's an honor to be able to share that conversation here on the podcast. Take a listen.
So you founded Ben's Chili Bowl together, 1958. You just celebrated a 66th anniversary of this place. You have been a witness to history, not just in this city, but in this country as well. But let's talk about your significance in this city. The story that I'm so curious about is Martin Luther King Jr. dining here and planning the March on Washington, one of the key moments in the civil rights movement. You spoke with him. What were your conversations about?
Well, I remember one conversation in particular, and that was that he'd had a meeting with President Kennedy, and he and John Lewis and A. Philip Randolph, a few of his comrades, and he said when he talked to President Kennedy, he said, "We're really unhappy about the injustices of black people, and we're going to bring a large number of people here to protest those injustices." He said, President Kennedy said to him, "I know, and we want to help as much as we can. But I don't think it's a good idea to bring a large number of protesters, because if there's an incident, it will set your movement back." And Dr. King said, "There won't be an incident. There will not be an incident." Well, history will tell you they brought 250,000 people here. No incident. A very inspiring day. Ben and I were there. A very inspiring day. He made that I Have a Dream speech. And when that day was over, we felt like change is going to come. Well, of course, we passed the Civil Rights Bill the very next year, 1964.
Incredible. That was a peaceful moment and an inspiring moment. And then sadly, years later, he's killed, and then the riots in the city. Tell me what you remember about that time.
That night, we were here, someone runs into the Chili Bowl and says, Dr. King has been shot. Well, we don't believe that.
What was your reaction?
We don't believe that. It's not true. Can't be true. One person, and then another come, and then another, and then a little later on, somebody came up with a transistor radio. And on that radio, they were beginning to play hymns. Dr. King had passed away. Well, then we saw people coming in being very emotional, sobbing openly and expressing their regret and their sadness. And then I think frustration set in. And that frustration turned to anger. And some people just took their frustrations out on our beautiful community. It was a very sad time. We were the only place that was asked to remain open during 3 nights of curfew.
And my understanding is you served both protesters and police in that time.
We did. We were the place that was always open to everybody. We still are. And no one bothered my place at all. But there again, we had been here 10 years by that time. And we knew, this community knew that we were there to stay. They knew that we were there to help in any way we could. and the community was there for me.
And when it comes to the U.S. election, here's something to consider. Holiday dinners, they're on the way. And that means so many of us, I think, are gearing up for those inevitable political talks that come up with loved ones who may see things a little bit differently than you do.
Yeah, we got to keep the words of Virginia in mind. Be kind. Sometimes these conversations can spark anything from major tension to some real full-blown arguments. So Lindsey had a chance to sit down with Hina Khan, a peak performance coach, and how to navigate these tricky conversations without any dinner table drama.
So let's just break this down. What is the difference between disagreeing on politics and having a toxic argument?
It's such a great question. The key difference is if somebody feels the need to be right or win the conversation. That will dissolve things really quickly because it affects how you're listening.
Absolutely. Okay, so that idea of wanting to win a conversation, that can be a red flag. Can you explain how that impacts our ability to actually listen to each other?
Lindsey, it's everything. And I think this is what I would love everybody to understand. If you are listening from the perspective of wanting to win or be right, when you're hearing what the other person is saying, you're hearing it looking for evidence of why they're wrong.
Right.
You're listening from the perspective of judgment, probably saying, I can't believe you think this way, and having to prove them wrong, which is a closed way of listening. But what I would love for people to think about is listening generously. And when you listen generously, you have empathy and you're authentically curious about the other person's point of view. And then that creates a space for a real constructive conversation to happen because you're really interested and you're not just trying to bolster your position and make them wrong so that you can be right.
But that takes two to tango, right?
It takes two to tango, but I'll tell you something. Most people do not listen generously, not only when it comes to politics, but in our own families, in companies. But if you can do that, you can really shift things in your relationship.
What about that whole, let's just agree to disagree? When things get heated, you're like, and I've said this, right?
Yes.
Let's just agree to disagree because obviously we're not making any headway here. Is this a good phrase to use? Is this not helpful? Is this helpful?
Well, I love what you said. It's like it happens when things are heated.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's almost like, let's just agree to disagree because we want to just end the conversation. But there's no closure in that, right? Like it sort of still feels unfinished. So I think a better approach is to say something like, okay, clearly we're not seeing eye to eye on this. Where do we want to go from here? Because now your attention is moving to an intentional way of finishing the conversation. And it could still be that, look, we agree to disagree, but there's more intention behind it because you're coming together on where we would like to go from here. Usually when people say agree to disagree, they're still mad. Or they're still really, really mad.
And it's really difficult, though, when you feel like morally you are in the right, to try to navigate that part of the conversation, I find very challenging.
I know, because sometimes we feel we have to police the universe, right? And we feel like we've got to change people's minds. And does anybody want to be changed?
Well, that's the tricky part, too,
right?
because often when I whip out the let's agree to disagree, it's because we're not nothing's happening.
Yes.
We're just trying to outdo each other, knowing full well that other person's I'm not going to change that other person's mind.
No, and nobody wants to be changed. And here's the thing which is hard for people to understand, because you and I were talking about this before, that, some of us have family members and they have a point of view and we are shocked by it.
Yes.
And we don't understand it. But here's the thing, Lindsey, they feel the same way about us. They are shocked by ours, and they're like, but I don't understand how you can feel that way.
Yeah.
So a better way to funnel your energy is get involved in communities and organizations where those causes that you're so passionate about, where you can actually make a difference on it. Because you're not going to make a difference butting heads with family.
It's true. Okay,
friends.
so obviously I mentioned off the top, the holidays are coming up.
Yes.
We all know that. That means that we're going to have people over, or we're going to be going to people's houses. So should our political views impact our guest list?
I think, right. Don't put this person beside this person.
Well, kind of, right?
Yeah, so I think if you're hosting, I think it's really a great idea to set out the expectations. And the intention is to gather kids, parents, grandparents, great conversation, and enjoy a meal together. And maybe you make it very clear that you're going to table political conversations for another day. And then you ask everyone that's coming to be in agreement with this, that they agree to this. Now, sometimes conversations get started and you're just there. You just said, pass the turkey, and next thing you know, it's getting heated.
It's true.
And so in that case, you also want to remember that you can remove yourself, you can change the subject.
You can do the dishes.
You can do the dishes,
Yeah,
and that would be
classic
very
move.
helpful.
So now let's take a look at the political landscape in Washington, this look post-election. We talked to both Republicans and Democrats for a look at what the future holds for both of these parties.
Really, there's so many questions, Kelsey, between now and January 20th, 2025, when the transition of power will happen. So we talked to Republicans and Democrats about what this win means for a new Republican Party and what the loss means for the Democrats going forward.
I think there's a lot of soul searching happening on one side of that spectrum. We'll take a listen now to both of those conversations.
He said this week he's going to act on promises delivered. So to take a closer look at what those are, let's bring in Paul Gardner. He's Associate Professor of Political Studies at Queen's University. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, if we take a close look at the people he has kept close to him in these last weeks of the campaign, I'm talking about Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Elon Musk, who could we expect to see as part of his transition team?
Well, I think that a big priority for President Trump is going to be having people who are loyal to implementing his agenda. Right? So oftentimes presidents place a big emphasis on their first 100 days of policymaking. And so Trump is probably going to be looking for people that are going to help him have a clear expression of his policy aims. But experience also matters, right? So people like Elon Musk aren't going to necessarily have the government experience to make sure that those policies can be implemented effectively.
Although this would be something similar he did to 2016 when he brought into the White House people who didn't necessarily have political experience. They had, loyalty to him and experience in their fields. We saw that didn't work really well for his transition team in the first couple of years of 2016. Would he make that same move again, or would he look to bring in more people with experience?
Well, I think that largely Trump has developed sort of a group of people around him that are committed to his goals. I think this time he's likely to come in with more support for the policies that he wants, right? Even if we look to something like Project 2025, which Trump has disavowed on the campaign trail, or at least tried to distance himself from, a lot of the goals in that sort of policy are directed towards things that Trump cares about as well. It's just a demonstration that he's likely to find people that will support his goals this time around. And I know that that's going to be a big priority for the administration.
He's got a lot of goals, or what he called promises, and he gave a speech where he said promises made will be promises kept. And one of the big ones is reducing bureaucracy. He's talked about getting rid of the FDA and expanding his presidential powers. So how does he plan to do that? What could that look like?
So the largest one is going to be related to civil service reforms. So right now, the federal government, the vast majority of people working in the executive branch have civil service protections. That means they're careerists that have expertise in the particular area that they work in, and they serve from administration to administration, regardless of partisanship.
Yeah, we have that here in Canada too. Same thing.
Right. So Trump has proposed removing civil service protections from a large number of those positions and replacing them with people that he believes will be more likely to implement his agenda. Trump has been very clear that he sees that this administrative state with civil service protections as being part of what he sometimes calls the deep state. And so for him to implement his agenda, he'd like to see more people with his shared partisan goals in government.
Well, that's really interesting because the number one issue across the board that people who voted him into office said is for them is the economy and is affordability. So then how does changing presidential powers or removing, protection for civil servants then benefit taxpayers in America? How does that build the economy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It remains to be seen exactly how Trump would use this sort of newfound authority, or even if it would stand up in the courts to remove those civil service protections. I think one misnomer about presidential politics is the extent to which presidents can control the way that the economy is developing. Certainly, some of the actions that Trump seems likely to take may have some economic effects, right? On the campaign trail, Trump has talked quite a bit about implementing new tariffs, which will certainly have downline economic effects, though I'll leave it to the economists to talk about what those might be. But it's clear that it's not just the civil service changes that are going to matter here.
I want to ask you really quickly about one he has said over and over again he will do in his first 100 days, and that is over immigration. He wants to deport immigrants, he said, are in this country illegally. He's blamed them for a number of systemic problems in the United States. Can he do that legally? What would that look like?
So there are a lot of different ways, there are lots of different powers that the president has to adjust immigration policy. You know, the Biden administration in recent weeks and months has been tougher on immigration. And so there's only so much room to go. I could see Trump placing new emphasis again on building his wall. But another potential area is pressure that could be put on judges who hear immigration cases. Those judges are part of the executive branch rather than traditionally part of the judicial branch for judges that hear other kinds of cases. And what that means is that they're potentially subject to pressures coming from the top, coming from the president. And so if Trump asks them to try to dispose of more cases more quickly, the judges might get the sense that their jobs depend on disposing of more cases, and that might mean disposing of them with resolutions that look like removal orders.
With the Democrats suffering a resounding defeat, Trump's administration will have one of the most powerful mandates in recent memory. So, what does this mean for Harris and the reeling Democratic Party? Joining us this morning from Washington with his analysis is Democratic strategist Brad Bannon. Welcome to Your Morning.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Well, we heard Vice President Harris yesterday talking about continuing to fight and honoring not necessarily who's in the Oval Office, but honoring the Constitution. Where does she go? Where does the vice president go from here?
Well, I expect that she's going to find some kind of high-profile position that she can use as a base to run for again in 2028. Democrats are already thinking about ways to run against the Republican nominee 4 years from now, which will probably be J.D. Vance, the new vice president, because Donald Trump will have served 2 terms and he'll be constitutionally ineligible to run again. And I'm sure Harris, having got the taste of running a presidential campaign, will want to go again. But I suspect there'll be opposition from other prominent Democrats to take the Democratic crown. A lot of Democrats are very unhappy. They felt that Harris should have beaten Donald Trump, given the personal and legal baggage that he was burdened with. And many Democrats find her performance lacking. So I suspect she will have serious opposition if she wants to run again for president in 2028.
Harris's campaign, we know, was only a little longer than 100 days. Joe Biden was in there ahead of time. Some people say he stayed too long. That being said, she had a lot of momentum at times. So where did this campaign fail to resonate with half the country?
Well, I think the big problem that Harris faced was the economy. If you looked at the National Election Day exit polls, large numbers of Americans were unhappy about their financial condition because of the inflation that reigned during the Biden-Harris administration. And I felt that, and I'm speaking as a Democratic strategist, that the vice president never addressed the concerns that most Americans had about the price of groceries. And I think that was the big failure in the campaign. I think Democrats going forward will have to do a much better job addressing the financial concerns of ordinary working class Americans. I think the Democratic Party needs a much more populist economic message that confronts the realities of working families having a hard time making ends meet. And Vice President Harris talked a lot about the decline of democracy under Donald Trump. She talked a lot about reproductive rights, but I don't think she ever directly addressed the biggest concern that Americans have about the prices they pay at grocery stores. And I think that was undoing. And she tried to waltz around that issue by talking about reproductive rights and the decline of democracy. But a famous Democratic political consultant, James Carville, once said, "It's the economy, stupid." And it was the economy on Tuesday. And I feel the vice president failed to address that.
We're glad you're joining Your Morning, the podcast. Every week, we bring you some of the most interesting conversations from our show on a wide variety of topics. And of course, you can always join us weekdays live, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern or 7 to 10 a.m. Atlantic on CTV CTV News Channel or on your CTV News app.
Well, after Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. election, this is really interesting. Google has seen a surge in American searches for how to move to Canada, and some south of the border are taking it one step further.
Yeah, a realtor from Toronto says she has been flooded with calls from Canadians living in the U.S. asking for information on how to move back.
So that realtor is Kaylee Heaps. She is the president and CEO of real estate firm Heaps Estrin. Anne-Marie, you had a chance to speak with her about how realtors are preparing with this sudden surge of interest.
Were you expecting to receive the amount of calls you're getting from Americans looking to move north?
No, I wasn't. Usually it takes a few weeks before our phone starts ringing. And yesterday it started first thing in the morning and kept going until the last call was probably about 8 o'clock last night, and from all over the country.
And what are they asking about? What are the questions they have for you?
So mostly affordability. What can I get for my money? If I move right now, can my children get into the school system there?
Those are serious questions.
These are real questions. A lot of people are saying one of the spouses will come with the children, and then the other spouse will come in time as soon as they can get their jobs transferred or find out if they can work remotely. But it wasn't just the thing that was different this time. It wasn't just the questions. It was, legitimate fear and sense of urgency in the phone calls, which I wasn't expecting at all.
And did they mention to you directly that this is because of the new administration coming in 2025?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have one group flying in today. Sorry to interrupt you. Flying in today from Boston, and they'll start their search today.
They're that serious?
They're that serious.
We did stories about this in 2016 after he won for the first time, an increase in people looking at maybe how to move up to Canada. I've met one or two of those families that made that move, but you didn't see a lot of them. Do you expect that the people you're hearing from are actually going to leave, like this couple in Boston, for example?
Yeah, I would say of the phone calls that we fielded yesterday, it would be reasonable to expect half of them to make the move. And I would say a third of them will do so with urgency.
What are they afraid of? What are they worried about?
One of them has a job that's tied to the political landscape, and they feel insecure not only in their work, but they use the word fear. Another one is a single female who works in pharma and has the ability to come back to Canada and has family here, so it feels like a no-brainer. And then I think if you add in the value of the US dollar against the Canadian dollar, there's also the purchasing power if they're already Canadian or have dual citizenship and can repatriate.
This is fascinating. How are realtors like yourself then getting themselves ready for a potential surge in people from the US moving north?
Yeah, I don't know that it will be significant enough that it's going to change the landscape of Toronto real estate, immediately. But certainly, we have to be well informed about there's foreign buyers taxes. We have to talk about dual citizenship, the permanent residency process, affordability. You know, there's a lot of things that go into this. You can't just, not anyone can just come to Toronto and buy a house. It's pretty multifaceted.
The other difference this time, Kaylee, that's also interesting is that remote work has entered the landscape. So it's actually easier for people to maintain a job and not live in the country that they're working from.
Without question. They can live here, and, you know, whether they commute back once a month, twice a month, it's very doable.
All right, let's turn now to health. Allergies, we know, affect millions of Canadians, including you, Kels, all year round.
They are the worst. It's itchy eyes, it's the scratchy throat. It is not comfortable. But listen, what if I told you there is a way to get rid of those symptoms, not by taking a pill every day. We are talking about a permanent fix for seasonal allergies.
Wow, it's called immunotherapy. And Kelsey, you spoke with Dr. Amira Ajnarain, who's a pediatric allergist. It's a fascinating conversation.
Immunotherapy is where we literally give you what you're allergic to on a regular basis so that your body builds blocking antibodies so that your symptoms improve over time for a more permanent solution.
Why do we have to do this as like a treatment? Why can't our bodies just do this naturally?
Yeah, so there are two types of antibodies. One is IgE, which is the allergy antibody, and then we build blocking antibodies, IgG. So I wish that we could, but it's almost like a vaccine where you create almost an immune response to protect yourself against your allergies. So it's a really good, more permanent solution.
What type of allergies is this for?
So things like grass, trees, weed, which currently grass is in full bloom, dust, cats, dogs. So some people have allergies to their pets. So this is something we can do for that too.
For someone who's listening at home right now, how effective is this? Is this like a one-time solution? Is this like how you take a antihistamine? It kind of works, but you don't really know. How effective are we talking?
Yeah, so antihistamines, great point, is one of the more common things that are used, but that's more like of a Band-Aid, right? You have a sneeze, you take an antihistamine. Immunotherapy, there's a range in terms of how people respond, but some people respond 100%, some a little bit less. But the point is you do it for like 3 to 5 years. So there's some upfront, investment, but then for 15, 20 years, even longer, you have nothing. You don't need to use antihistamines. And that possibility is really awesome.
Yeah, no kidding. So a lot of positives there. Let's talk about possible reactions or symptoms that people can have from this. If your body's being exposed to what you're allergic to, what kind of downside could there be? Are you having a reaction when you start immunotherapy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we always tell our patients, most commonly you might have a little bit of itchiness at the site where we're injecting you, or it also comes in the tablet form, so you might get itchy under the tongue. But the more serious reactions are anaphylaxis, so coughing, wheezing, full body hives. But it is important you're monitored at your doctor's office when you get your shots because of that exact side effect.
I know adults who have gone through this and found great success and seen a huge reduction in their symptoms. But what about for kids? Is something like this safe for them as well?
Yeah, so it's approved, the tablet version, as young as 6 years old. So I have kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old that are doing grass pollen, weed pollen, and it really improves their outcomes. It makes their asthma symptoms better. So it really is great. And I always say the younger, the better. Our immune systems are much more malleable when you're young. So I like starting people very young. And then, in their teenage years, they're not always like taking tissue out of their bags and pockets, right? So, I suffer from allergies, and I think it's an amazing thing for patients to try.
You mentioned a bit of an investment. So let's talk about coverage, whether or not it's covered by health insurance. For example, in Ontario, would this be covered by OHIP? And if not, how much are people normally paying?
Yeah, so the great news is it is covered for OHIP for under 25. So all my pediatric patients and even my teenagers, it's covered. So that's awesome. In terms of if you don't have coverage, it's covered under most drug plans, just like you would get a medication. But if you have zero coverage, the range depends on like how many allergens you're on and what your actual injection is, but let's say $500 to about $1,000 a year.
Okay, well, something to keep in mind. If you are suffering right now, since it is that peak time, doctor, thanks for being here.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
So a new study has shown us that this year, more than 30% of Ontarians are using marketplace platforms like Facebook and Kijiji because of the increased cost of living. It's a really great way to save money. I mean, I do it. I know you do it too, Kels.
I know, but there's things to consider here. Tech analyst Carmi Levy says using these platforms comes with a real risk of getting scammed.
All right, so he came on the show, talked to Lindsey about some tips on how you can protect yourself.
stock photos, stock imagery is often a tell. Sometimes you'll also see, not in this case, but you'll also see just really bad photos, low quality, pixelated. You look at the copy as well. The copy is very clearly cut and pasted from the original item. So wherever it was originally sold, they just pasted it in. And then when you look at the reviews, many of them are they're also copy pasted, badly written. They're from accounts that have single names on them that are ghost accounts. If you look them up, you really can't tell where they come from. So lots of screaming red flags on this one that basically you shouldn't be buying here.
So that's on the buyer side, but what about on the seller side? Because sellers can be targeted by scammers on these platforms as well. So what does that look like?
It looks like a non-legitimate buyer, and so it's someone whose account was maybe recently set up. They don't have a whole lot of history, so they also don't have a whole lot of members or friends in their network. And if you look at the things that they've posted, in many cases they're also very low quality. They almost don't seem to exist. If you look them up on other platforms, you can't find their actual identification information. They were essentially created for the purpose of scamming.
Okay, so what should people look out for to confirm an ad is in fact real?
If the price is too good to be true, it probably is. Look for those low quality imagery and copy as well. Also look at those reviews, look at the descriptions, and just check that background. If you can't be sure that you are dealing with someone that you are comfortable dealing with, that's the tell that you should be backing away.
Let's talk about the actual transaction portion of an interaction. Why is it important to avoid transactions online?
Because online, you can't verify that you are, in fact, dealing with a legitimate buyer or seller. And so in person, I know it sounds unsafe because you actually have to see them, but if you go with someone, never go alone, you can actually be sure that you're dealing with a legitimate person and that they, in fact, do have the actual product that you want to either buy or sell. You can't do that online. And in fact, many scammers will simply back away from an in-person attempt. It's just not worth their time.
A lot of people made bread during COVID. I bought and sold things on Facebook Marketplace. And I found that the best meeting spot for me was in a grocery store parking lot. Like that was the go-to, and cash in hand. Not that I'm advising anybody to do any of that, but that was my move. Carmi, what are some other ways people can protect themselves from scamming?
So in many cases, you'll be asked to pay a deposit or pay up front. No, that is an absolute tell. You'll be asked to download an app to pay them through that app, or sometimes you'll ask to pay in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency. That's another sign. Also, if you're asked to give your banking information to authorize payment, that usually should be a sign as well. And so, bottom line here is that these tells are very clear and they're used very frequently. As long as you're aware of them, you see one of them, you know that that's your sign. Go find somewhere else.
Kels, my kids never want to come to work with me unless we're talking to stars from shows that they love. They would have loved your conversation with the Outer Banks cast members. Season 4 already.
Season 4.
Let's listen.
Well, it is a show viewers just can't get enough of. Outer Banks Season 4 debuted at the top of Netflix's most watched shows with 15.5 million views following Part 1's October 10th premiere.
We were gonna live the good life, the simple life.
We're in business, baby!
Treasure hunting was in the past.
Sarah, how's Hogue life treating you?
But what we didn't know at the time
Okay, right here.
is that nothing ever stands still.
That was the last of our savings.
For everyone excited, the highly anticipated Part 2 drops today. Joining me in studio are 3 stars of the show, Rudy Panko, Carlacia Grant, and Austin North. Great to have you guys on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having
us.
Okay, so everyone's really excited. One of our producers, Julia, is pretty much dying that you guys are in studio today because she loves the show this much. Carlacia, for everyone who's watching, what can viewers expect from this next part?
Explosions, bad guys, Moroccan dunes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. Concise. You don't want to give anything away.
Yes.
Leave it for everyone to watch. Listen, it really feels like as we've been watching the show, we've watched your characters grow up. There's been a huge amount of evolution. So, Austin, I want to ask you, what has that been like for you guys on set?
It's been amazing. I mean, we're all so close as a cast, but also, the character development has been so fun to play into as actors. And Season 4, I mean, the stakes are, I think, the highest it's ever been. And Part 2 is, like she said, explosive and just dramatic, and I'm excited for the fans to see it.
I feel like for you guys, you must not be able to walk anywhere these days without getting recognized. In fact, you guys walked in and like people outside were already waving to you. Rudy, I want to throw it way back. We found this photo that you posted on your Instagram of what appears to be you working in a restaurant on the one side to being on that red carpet. So a way back throwback. What has it been like to go from like not knowing if acting was going to be the career forever to like catapulting to international recognition?
Yeah, I mean, that photo, I remember when I took it, I was like, this is going to be inspiration for later. And, when I honestly booked it the next year, it was like, okay, that's good. I'm definitely gonna have to show that one out there of just like hard work does pay off. And it was, I think the date is above it. If you do look,
September 25th, 2017?
Yeah,
Wow.
2 years actually. And then, it was definitely a moment where I was like, I'm gonna keep looking at that photo until the dream comes true.
And it's come true.
Yeah,
Come true. Rudy and Austin, we see a lot of physicality in your guys' characters on screen. You guys are like riding bikes, you're deep sea diving. So how do you prep for something like that as an actor? Is there a lot of physicality and training that has to go in to get you ready for what we see on screen?
Everyone's training,
Yeah.
I don't think they're purposely training. They're just training. They're on set just running.
Yeah,
constantly.
we're working with the best of the best. I think we're working with Captain America's stunt double, season 1, when John B. and Topper have that big fight scene on the beach, and then we have the big dirt bike racing sequence in episode 1, which you kind of just got to adapt as you go and as you film. There's so many moving pieces, and it's hard to fully prep for it, but you just figure it out as you go.
Carlita, you mentioned you guys are really close. Yeah. That you have a good relationship offset. And it's cool to see because the folks have a relationship on screen. There's like that friendship is real. So offset or off screen, on set, what is that like for you guys?
I mean, we're literally just like playing games, like joking on each other, at crafty, like napping sometimes, but just like hanging out.
Just hanging.
Yeah, just hanging out.
Getting to go to work with your best friends is probably the dream come true.
Oh yeah, 2 birds, 1 stone.
The Pokes built a surf shop with some of their treasure money, and you guys filmed a hilarious commercial written and directed by your co-star who plays Pope. Let's take a look at this.
Bring it on home to the Kildare County Surf Shop, built by Pogues.
4 Pogues.
4 Pogues.
4 Pogues. Yeah, no kooks allowed. I got you.
No, we some kooks.
Wait, no.
And don't forget to book your scuba and surf tour by JJ Mithik.
What's it like getting to lean into your personalities to do something like that? That's not like directly within the show, just to get to film and have fun.
It's absolutely great, especially with Jonathan directing. You're actually in the writer's room. Like, this is kind of like what I want my character to say. And he was so open and so willing and really allowed us to like improv.
I will say he runs a tight ship though. Like he was punctual, right?
Oh yeah.
I don't know. He was all right, we're moving on. Like we got it in the can.
Yeah.
Like as much as fun as it was, he did direct the ship pretty well.
Oh yeah, he was a boss.
He turned into a boss.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Thanks so much for being with us today.
For more great conversations, download or hit subscribe to Your Morning, the podcast. We're on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcast.
And don't forget, you can always watch us live. We love when you do weekday mornings on CTV, CTV News Channel, or on your CTV News app. Start your morning with us.